Hello, everyone. Today we're
What's
here to
up?
talk. How's it going, guys?
Absolutely
What's
fantastic.
going on?
Awesome.
Yo.
Awesome. We're here today, obviously, to talk about the Moneyball method, applying baseball's data-driven revolution to sales management. Before we dive in, do have to start off with a quick icebreaker, and since it is Halloween, have to ask, what's your favorite candy? Pete, you want to start us off?
Ooh, I'm pretty easy. Skittles are my favorite, easily. And one of the things that we joke about on the Atrium sales team is we're big Marshawn Lynch fans, right? And if anyone knows, just because he's so proactive, and you got to be that way in sales, right? You got to run through the defenders. His mom used to give him Skittles at his practices, like if he did a good job. And so we have Skittles. We give Skittles, like little packets of Skittles, to our sales team when they do a good job of like running through the defenders. So, and then I just eat them in the corner. It's pretty bad.
Awesome. My favorite candy is Hershey's Cookies and Cream Bars, which is a
Mhm.
little bit of a deep cut. It's a little bit niche in the candy world, but I was just chatting with Pete earlier and I was thinking, I feel like I've been eating a lot of candy lately. It's probably something I need to cut out, but that is my favorite one.
What about you, Elliot? What's your favorite?
I'm with you, Pete. Not Skittles, the original flavor, but sour Skittles. I have never been able to
Ooh.
get enough of them. Definitely have almost gotten cavities multiple times.
Love it. I'll have to give those a try.
No, just yeah, definitely do. Okay, I do see that we have a few more people in attendance, so I'm
All
gonna get us
right.
started.
Let's
Yep,
jam.
yep. Talking Moneyball method, applying baseball's data-driven revolution to sales management. Super excited to get into the content and all the takeaways that everyone in this event will be getting. Um, First, do want to say that today's event is brought to you by the MSP team, Modern Sales Pros. For those of you who are not familiar, Modern Sales Pros is the world's largest and highest quality community for those in sales management, sales leadership, sales and revenue operations, and sales enablement, aka our Modern Sales Pros. Our mission is to create an environment for our members to answer questions they struggle to solve on their own and help them see around corners that they may not know about. We do that through live sessions like this, an online forum, our quarterly summits, and we're now starting to actually get back into in-person events, which I'm super happy about. If you're not already a part of MSP, you'll be invited to join after this event. And if you do like this event, we actually just held a 3-day RevX Fest summit earlier this month. We pulled together about 24 events of super amazing content and speakers. You'll be hearing from the CEO of Zoom Info, Gainsight, Cowboy Ventures, by Design, and so many others. I'm actually going to be dropping the link to those recordings in the chat. Looks like Hannah did already. Thank you so much, Hannah, on top of it.
Mhm.
Um, so right before we dive in, do you want to go over some housekeeping notes? First of all, this event is being recorded, so you'll be able to access this recording and any key takeaways on the previous events page of the MSP website. Second, if there's any questions for our panelists, there's actually a Q&A function. You'll see that at the top right of Goldcast. So please do use that and we'll do our best to get to them during this event. All right, time to get into the meat of things. I'm going to hand things over to you, P, to talk about Atrium, introduce yourself, and Richard.
All
All
right.
you.
Lovely. Thank you, Elliot. I appreciate it.
hmm
Amazing
No
sweater
problem.
today. I love it.
Thank you.
Hey, everyone. I'm Pete Kazanjy. I'm one of the founders of Atrium. For those who are not familiar with Atrium, I'm actually here in Boston right now. That's why I look like I'm in a box right now. I'm in a WeWork call booth here in Boston, visiting a bunch of our customers. I'm super pumped about that. But we make data-driven sales management software. It's software that helps sales managers, leaders, and reps use metrics to improve the performance of their teams. One of the really cool things about Atrium is it takes about 5 minutes to set up. With a read-only connection to your Salesforce CRM, you can set up a free account in 5 minutes, get yourself a world-class world-class metrics harness that shows you how your reps are performing across 100 plus metrics. So let me go ahead and share my screen right here. We'll do a little bit of the Hall of Mirrors. Can you see that okay, Richard? I want to make sure.
Yeah.
I struggle doing it off one screen here. I don't have my
Sure.
external. I don't have my external monitor. I feel like partially naked. It's kind of like creeping me out. But yeah, let's do some introductions here. As I noted, I'm Pete Kazanjy. I'm one of the founders of Atrium. I lead our go-to-market function. I guess the fancy term for that is CRO. Prior to Atrium, I started a software company called TalentBin. It was a recruiting software company that was acquired by Monster Worldwide in 2014, and yeah, I mean that's kind of like where I started on my my data-driven sales management, sales excellence journey. I started as a founder, founder generalist, business generalist, and then I was our first sales rep, for sales manager, sales leader, and then we were acquired by Monster. I was responsible for new product sales for 500 person sales org. So a little bit different there. Subsequent to that, ended up writing a book on startup sales called Founding Sales that kind of encapsulated all that experience, and then also started Modern Sales Pros. So that's a little bit about me. Richard, can you maybe share a little bit about what you spend your time doing here at Atrium with the fine folks who are here today, and kind of what you worked on before that?
Of course. Thank you, Pete. And hello, everyone. My name is Richard Lynn. I'm a senior CSM here at Atrium. I've been with the company for just under a year, coming up on that 1 year mark. And I'm based out of
Nice.
Marina Del Rey here in Los Angeles, California. I come from a background in sales finance and operations and did some data infrastructure before that. So I spent a lot of time standing up data warehouses, standing up BI tools, and working with a variety of teams, including central strategy teams, product teams, as well as go-to-market teams, helping to serve their data needs, whether that was building dashboards, building infrastructure, just helping them use BI tools. And what I found myself wanting to do is come to a smaller shop and have a larger impact at a smaller company, and stumbled upon Atrium, was connected with Pete, which just so happened to be productizing a lot of the work that I was doing before. And so now I have an opportunity to work with what we like to call our tier 3 and 4, our larger customers, helping them implement Atrium and ultimately get a lot of value and success using data and metrics to manage their sales teams.
Love it. Yes. So I'm pumped that we have such a fantastic subject matter expert here today for this topic, because Richard, gets to work with dozens and dozens of our hundreds of customers. And so he's like really in the weeds and kind of sees what the bleeding edge of data-driven sales management looks like. Before we get started here, some resources for folks. If you're interested in grabbing some of these, I think we're going to drop a link in the chat. A couple of resources for folks that are around sales coaching. 5 Secrets of Sales Coach is one of my favorite books on the topic. It's a really great page turner. It's written actually as a novel, but it's really great around the actionability of coaching and sales coaching. The Michelle Vezana's book, Crushing Quota, is another great one. It's a little more technical. Like this one's kind of the page turner. This one's a little bit more of the of a kind of like a textbook, but like they're two great tastes that taste great together. And then of course, if you'd like one of our illustrious Atrium Yetis, this one is the Coffee is for Coaches Yeti. We're going to go ahead and drop a link here. Just sign up for those, and all we ask for in exchange is a quick discovery call with our lovely account, one of our lovely account executives. So let's talk about what we're going to talk about today. We're going to be talking about Moneyball for sales management, why Moneyball matters, and how it changed the industry, data-driven sports management, and then we're going to change gears a little bit and see how the same kind of concepts apply to the world of sales, and then get into some kind of real life examples there. So, if folks are are familiar, there's this fantastic movie that came from a book called Moneyball, and there's this wonderful scene where Jonah Hill's character is having a conversation with Brad Pitt's character in a parking garage, where he essentially says that that baseball management thinking is medieval, and the funny thing is, like, you could really just take word for word. You can take that little monologue there and really just map it onto sales, and it wouldn't be inaccurate, right? Where really, 15 years ago or so, there was this epidemic failure in baseball organizations to understand what was really happening, largely because people just didn't want to pay attention to they didn't want to measure and use metrics to measure what was going on in their teams for a variety of reasons. And it led those baseball organizations to not be as successful as they could be. And then the same is kind of happens in sales, where there's all this information that is available to us, and really in order to be effective modern sales leaders, we should be making use of that data and those metrics. And we're going to talk about a little bit about like how that changed over time in sports and how it can apply in sales as well. So like the first kind of like probably the most famous example here of this sports analytics revolution was in the form of the Oakland A's. And specifically what they did was they used baseball metrics as a mechanism by which to be better and more clever at recruiting. And specifically what they were doing was they were able to look at baseball players on the market based on their historical statistics, because baseball has 162 games in a season. Players get lots and lots of at bats, so there's like very data rich situation, and make judgments about those players and how they might perform on the A's. Even if maybe they didn't like look like your prototypical baseball player, right? Like maybe they're a little bit out of shape, or maybe they were like in a different position or what have you. And so and that was like their exploits. They were using metrics to be able to find undervalued assets. And so the funny thing is you can kind of see how successful they were here in this chart. So this right here, the y-axis right here, is how much more or how much less payroll expense a given baseball team spent in a given year, and then as compared to the average. And then this axis right here, the x-axis, was how many wins above the league average that they were able to deliver, right? And so the funny thing is you can kind of see this linear relationship here. Like it turns out you spend more money on players, like you're gonna win more games. And you can see up here in the upper right hand corner there's the New York Yankees, because like they're in New York, so they have the most like economic power at their disposal. And then you've got Boston Red Sox and the LA Dodgers, and essentially it's just like, hey, we spend more money on things, and like guess what, we win more games. But then the funny thing is that down here you see Oakland, right? And they buck this trend where they spend a lot less money from a payroll standpoint, but gee, if they didn't get more wins, right, than this linear relationship. And so this was the initial exploit that the A's were able to bring to bear in it. And like what they were able to do is win a lot of games and a lot of playoffs, make it to the playoffs quite a bit without breaking the bank there. And so this is really kind of like uncorked the kind of initial kind of ideas around, at least in the popular imagination, around using metrics to be more effective in managing, in this case, recruiting for professional sports teams. Richard, you're an A's fan, right?
I certainly am. I grew up in the East Bay of Northern California, and I took part a lot to A's games, and I was super excited when this movie came out. If not filled with chagrin over I don't know, a decade of the A's ultimately not succeeding in winning a World Series, but a big fan of this method, how it was sort of brought to light by Billy Beane and the Oakland A's and his team, ultimately brought to the big screen, and also something that we're doing these days here at Atrium, trying to kind of surface those hidden anomalies that we can use to bring our teams up to performance.
Yeah. And so it's funny that you mentioned the Bay Area teams. We'll get into that a little bit more here in a second. But another place where the same concept really impacted professional athletics was in basketball. So one of the kind of key insights in basketball analytics was that if you think about how hard it is to make a basket, right? And so on the left here, what you have is the field goal percentage, like how likely it is for a basket to go in, or excuse me, a shot to go in, based on where it's taken on the floor. And so the interesting thing here is this information was previously not really available. But what ended up happening was motion capture cameras and then software to analyze that became available in basketball. And so pretty quickly, what people were able to see was like, hey, look, like yes, it's higher percentage for, like, if you're closer in, it's higher percentage for shots to get made. And then, and unsurprisingly, when you get out here a little further away from the basket, the shot percentage goes down. But the key insight here, which was interesting, was that it just turns out that when you get beyond that 3-point line right there, well, the number of points that you're able to gather for making a shot goes from 2 to 3. And so the kind of the key insight there was that you could just step behind that line right here, and like turns out that like the shot percentage doesn't go down very terribly much, but boy, doesn't the amount of points that you get go up. And so what's funny is that if you take the shot percentage and then you cross it with how many points you're going to get, and you get a average points per shot, well, pretty quickly what you end up seeing is that yes, down here under the basket, you have a higher, points per shot, and then it starts getting low again as you get out here into the, into the field, and then right when you get beyond that 3-point line, all of a sudden it pops back up again. And so what that kind of would indicate is that, man, if we can shoot more of these threes, well, guess what? We'll probably, we might score some more points. And so probably the first team that exploited that was the Golden State Warriors. Another Richard Lynn favorite here. And so the fascinating thing is that the Warriors went from like kind of a crappy team in the early 2010s.
Tell me about it.
Certainly in the 2000s, right? Like just kind of this like regional, like not so great team. And then what they were able to do is like use this analytics exploit here, this insight to really change the way that they played their game. And of course, probably the face of this is Steph Curry. Everyone is familiar with Steph Curry. He's an amazing 3-point shooter. He's an amazing shooter in general. But it wasn't just that, right? And like the Warriors really changed, but they used data to change the way that they played the game. So yeah, like let Steph go behind the 3-point line and shoot more, but like also give him the ball more, right? Like let's feed him the ball. In fact, actually, we should recruit other people who shoot like this, like Klay Thompson and what have you. And then moreover, man, maybe we should like run more plays that put these guys in a position where they can shoot more like this. And maybe we should practice that. So this kind of key insight infused the entire way that they played their game. And the proof was in the pudding. They went from being this like pretty mediocre team to all of a sudden just like running the table with with the rest of the NBA. And so just like back to back championships, with the exception of this one right here, dope. And really like it like revolutionized how the way the Warriors played the game. Now the funny thing, of course, is that it didn't stay a secret for long. Right. And I think that this is actually a really interesting and compelling insight for us as professionals. Is like, look, when new capabilities become required or like become available, when new sources of advantage show up, it really kind of becomes required. It's not like, oh, you know what, those Warriors, they can manage by metric and they can do those threes, but not us. No, not us. That's a great way to get fired as a coach. Right. And so you can kind of see this here where like this is a shot spray, like the top 200 shot locations in the NBA in 2001, 2002. And then the funny thing is, like, you look at in 2019 into 2020 here, like pretty much everyone got the memo. Right? It took a second, but everyone got the memo, and it really changed the way that the game was played. And I think there's a good insight there for folks. It's like, look, if there's an opportunity for folks to embrace a new technology or a new way of running their business, as the NBA saw this, you're really doing yourself a disservice if you don't embrace that. And so the funny thing is, you can kind of see the evolution here, where this is the percentage of shots that were 3-pointers versus 2s, and you can kind of see like right up until like 2011 there is like pretty static there, and then it really starts like taking off here. And they're like, this is the area where in like the Warriors and I think actually the Houston Rockets were probably good adopters of this as well. And everyone was probably being like, I don't know, those guys are hippies, like those nerds, they're doing this, like look at all those threes they're shooting, until they actually started really changing the way that outcomes were happening. And then everyone else kind of fell into line here. You can see it really accelerates here. And so I think there's a really good insight there. But I think the thing here that's kind of fascinating is like there's always a next evolution, right? So baseball is a good example of this, where to start, Moneyball, this notion of Moneyball really started with recruiting advantage, right? Like how people like use metrics to identify undervalued players, but you can actually get more granular from a data standpoint. And so the baseball team started doing that, where they were looking at where players are hitting the ball on a recurring basis, and because then they can change their behavior, right? Because this is why we use metrics and data. We don't just do it for funsies. We do it in order to change behavior and change how we execute gameplay, or how we execute doing our business to drive better performance. And so teams started understanding where players had a tendency to hit the ball, and then what they would do is they would move their players accordingly. So in this case right here, you can see this is this Curtis Granderson guy here. He has a tendency, as you can kind of see, he hits lots of ground balls to the right side of the field. Not all the time, right? Sometimes they go over here. And so what this means is, if you want to defend against Curtis here, well, what you would do is you would pull your players over here. And so that's what teams would do. They would pull the shortstop over to the other side of the field here, putting 3 players on this side of the field such that they could suck up those ground balls and get Curtis out. And so the funny thing about this, so as teams started doing this more and more, if players weren't able to adapt as a result, well, there were potentially pretty negative implications there. So kind of like this part right here, like the teams that decided they were not going to adopt the 3-point centric offense, they probably ended up losing those games. In this case, good example of this is this gentleman named Ryan Howard here, where you can see, he was a MVP contender, and you can see his batting average here against no shift, right? So when players are not being shifted around on the field versus the shift, and you can see he goes from batting 424, which is like really good, to batting 282 against the shift there, which is not terrible, but it's not amazing. It's definitely not like 424. And you can see that his slugging percentage goes down dramatically, et cetera, et cetera. So essentially it's like a 30+% reduction in performance there, because he wasn't able to adapt to this new way of playing the game that kind of came from data. Richard, what do you think? Did he just need like a better CSM to help coach him up and show him the light around like how to change his behavior based on data?
Maybe if he just sat on a couple of pitches, he probably could have pushed him to the other side of the field and kept playing. But he was a very expensive player as well. So, who knows what could have happened with Ryan Howard in practice. But yeah, certainly I think the shift affected a lot of his late career performance.
Yeah, for sure. And I think one of the things that was fascinating when I was putting this presentation together, it was like the A's, unsurprisingly, are one of the biggest adopters of the shift. And so my takeaway from that is this idea of like, hey, like once you're data driven, you're always going to be data driven. And that's a very powerful thing, because you can use that as a source of advantage for whatever it happens to be. Like if you have this muscle internally to your organization, you're going to be able to use it at your disposal. So the A's were a great example of this, where the funny thing is that they, if you look at how the Major League Baseball shifts against right-handed batters, the MLB on average around like 20% of the time their teams are shifting, whereas the A's are shifting 30% of the time. And for lefties, yeah, it's 50% of the time in the MLB, but for the A's it's 73%, which is just indicate that the A's like are just way all in on data driven. In this case, it's not data driven recruiting, it's data driven like defensive management, if you will. And it's really done a great job for them. So the last example we'll kind of touch on here is golf, actually, which is pretty fun. I think, Richard, you said you have like a New Year's resolution for the end of this year and for next year to get better at golf. Is that right?
Yeah, get better. It's a high hill to climb for sure from where I'm looking right now.
Well, that's good. I mean, we have quite the golf posse on on the Atrium go-to-market team, but it turns out that like you can apply data-driven management to golf as well. Kind of a good example of this is a system called Decade that essentially looks at how to play different holes, and some of the insights from this essentially like golf methodology that is driven by data analysis is that it turns out that like high shot counts come from bogeys and double bogeys, right? It's not like, people are not they're not ruining their golf scores because like they accidentally get the the par instead of the birdie, or they miss the birdie or whatever. It's like they do something dumb and they like totally bust out, right? Like they get stuck in a sand trap and they have to like hack their way out of it, or like they're in deep rough or what have you. And so the problem is that what's known as like birdie hunting is kind of like vanity, right? Like for most players, you're not Tiger Woods. And so what ends up happening is like you try to take a shot that's going to put you in a position to maybe hit a birdie, and lo and behold, you end up missing that missing that shot. And so instead, now congratulations, like you're in the rough, you're in the trap, you're in the water, etc. And now you're looking at double, like you thought you were going for a birdie, now you're going for a double bogey, right? And so the insight here is that you should always just try to get closer, like stop with these notions of laying up, or like really kind of like trying to be finessing it. And so a great example of this was how there's a very famous golf course called like Riviera that really changed how players play this particular hole here. And you can kind of see it on the left here, where bogeys, so like these are where people shot their approach shot, and then the ultimate outcome of it is bogeys are in black here, and the birdies and pars are in the other colors. And so what you can see is like prior to analytics really kind of impacting the game in 2015 here, you can see a lot of players were seeking to lay up, and so what happened as a result was that was driving a lot of bogeys, in fact. And so now what you can see is players don't try to lay up, they just go for it. And the funny thing is that like the players that do like layup, they still like bogey quite a bit. So like they haven't gotten the memo, if you will. And so what you can see is that like players just go for it here. They try to get in here because they know that trying to lay up here is going to put them in a situation where, because they're not as accurate as they'd love to tell themselves a story about, they just end up like mishitting it, ending up over here anyway. And so this has now led to a wholesale way that that players end up playing this hole here. So that's a little bit about like how data has changed sports management. And so there's an interesting question for us. It's like, okay, well, like what are we doing here in sales? It's time to drive to join the 21st century. And so if you think about sales, we actually have a similar situation as sports, where you can really decompose the output metrics, in our case it's bookings, wins, etc., into inputs, input metrics, and kind of efficiency and quality metrics there as well. And so what that ends up looking like for sales organizations on a per role basis is you can look at these inputs, like say we're talking about an SDR team, email call counts, number of accounts interacted with, number of contacts being interacted with, calls, unique like new contacts and new accounts that are coming into the pipe. And then efficiency and quality metrics as well, things like email responsiveness rates, how well people are multi-threading, like the contacts they're touching per account, how many touches they're putting on their account, those accounts, and kind of conversion rates between leads and accounts being touched versus opportunity creation. And so this stuff, right? Like you can decompose a prospecting motion for SDRs, or a sales motion for AEs, or a success motion for CSAMs. You can decompose them into these metrics the same way that you can decompose a player's performance. And then importantly, once you decompose that, you can then instrument that and see where there's improvement that needs to be made, and make people better there. And by way of a little bit of like context on Atrium here, this is literally what we do here at Atrium is we help sales managers, leaders, and reps use metrics to improve their team performance. One of the reasons why we do this is because we're really focused on helping sales managers be more successful, because they're like the first line of defense when it comes to making those SDR, those SDRs, those AEs better. The problem, of course, is that great sales management is really tough to do. There's actually a lot of things that you have to do. Not only do you need to be doing deal inspection and strategy, which guess what, like most sales managers probably don't need encouragement to do that because they come from an AE background and usually kind of it's like gravitate towards that. But there's actually a bunch of other stuff that needs to be done as well. Like you need to be setting and tracking progress towards goals and the completion thereof, not just like bookings, but also precursor metrics as well, like new opportunity inflow or customer facing meetings, or like, opportunity ownership or hygiene, things like untouched ops. The same is true on the SDR side. You should be bringing metrics into your one-on-ones. You should be monitoring the ramp of new hires. It's extremely important. And then for folks who are already ramped, using metrics to identify issues and then fix them on their reps and make them better. And then of course take what makes top performers the most, what makes them special, and then spread that love around, kind of like our buddy Steph Curry here, right? Like take what makes the sales motion or the scoring motion super effective and then standardize that across the rest of the team. All of this is something that sales managers and leaders need to be doing. The problem, of course, is that most organizations don't really do their teams many favors when it comes to this. Typically, manager enablement, especially as relates to data-driven sales management, ends up being an afterthought. Most tooling is really focused on reps. And then if you think about the best case scenario, it really is these like horizontal legacy analytics solutions, kind of Richard was talking about earlier, that are doing death by dashboard for a lot of these
managers.
And so what ends up happening is that managers kind of they revert to their default, which is just doing deals, which doesn't really help their reps do better. And so what our claim would be is that there's a better way to do this. We call it data-driven sales management. And because the craft of sales management, AE management, SDR management, et cetera, is so important, it deserves its own set of software that to kind of help achieve that, which includes every KPI you could possibly want for those teams, tracking progress on goals and completion thereof, not early warning, alerting on those metrics, like, hey, this rep's win rate is problematic as compared to his peers. In fact, and you should get on top of this. This rep over here, he's outperforming with respect to average sales price. Like, what's he doing that we can get other reps to do so they can close bigger deals? And then also doing root cause analysis, like, hey, by the way, that rep that had a low win rate right there, it's because his win rate is low because his conversion rate out of pilot is dramatically off as compared to his peers. And so like these are the things that are kind of table stakes for a modern sales management motion. And that we believe that organizations should be providing their managers. And so this is kind of what it looks like in practice. There's a variety of ways that Atrium, bird dogs, these sort of things, looks at, reps as compared to their peers, even in ramp as well. It'll track progress on goals and kind of completion thereof. And like I noted earlier, it'll do root cause analysis to tell you like where the issues are with your reps. And so what's kind of great about this is it allows you to change behavior, because that's what we want to do, is we want to change behavior. Customer of ours, when they first started out, they recognized that they had a pretty substantial pipeline hygiene problem, as indicated by the number of untouched opportunities that were in people's pipes. And so what they were able to do is say, hey, we have this pretty pervasive pipeline hygiene issue here. We're not managing our pipes the way that we should. We're going to go ahead and we're going to fix that. We're going to change behavior on our team. We're going to drive down that untouched op count. And lo and behold, doing so, this is not surprising, doing a better job at pipe management led to a rise in win rate, which of course led to a substantial rise in bookings as compared to prior. These are the sort of things that come out of identifying an issue in the organization or on a rep by rep basis, changing the behavior of the rep, so addressing it and changing behavior to drive outcomes like this. Richard, I mean, you obviously spend a ton of time with our customers. Can you think of other examples like this where teams identified, maybe a pervasive issue across the team, and then were able to tackle it and kind of like glow up the entire team accordingly?
Yeah, I mean, pipeline hygiene is always a super popular one because it's very tangible and something that leadership looks at a lot. But also, just top line effort and volume is something that I've worked with a lot of my customers on. You had a slide earlier that talked about goal setting, and goal setting is really my sort of strongest analogy back to Moneyball management. I literally work
Mm-hmm.
with managers to build a path to quota for their reps. And it's really similar to a scene in Moneyball where Jonah Hill is
Mm-hmm.
like, hey, in order to make the playoffs, you have to score X number of runs. So
Right.
we sort of take that back to the reps and say, in order to hit your quota, here's your quota. And from there, you need to own X number of opportunities. You have to maintain an average sales price of X dollars and X% win rate. And if you hit all of these targets, you will definitely clear your quota. And we build this in for all of their reps. And that's kind of like one of those first sort of tangible rep behavior type motions that I work with a lot of my customers on.
Yeah. Yeah, there's so many great actually this is one of the things that we do at the Atrium team is we have a movie day or like movie afternoon. It's Fridays like once a month, and we do sales centric movies and like math centric movies. So Moneyball is one of them, and I'm totally remembering the scene where Billy Bean is telling David Justice like, hey man, you got to take more pitches. Right? You got to
Mm-hmm.
take more pitches because your batting average goes like if you take more pitches, your batting average goes up. Hey man, like we gotta get like we're putting time on your calendar. We're putting 90 minutes on Tuesday morning and 90 minutes on Thursday afternoon for you to manage your pipeline because like good Lord, you have 20 untouched ops right now. And if you look at your untouched ops over time, like you're kind of a chronic offender there. And we're gonna put this like we're gonna make you change your behavior in order to drive this better output because we know that it's gonna make things better for you. And just I think this is one of the things that really helps our sales managers do this is because oftentimes sales managers, and this is actually why we work with Richard Harris, a sales management trainer, to kind of help our managers, our SDR managers, AE manager customers get more comfortable around just sales management in general, not data-driven sales management. That's like our customer success team helps with that. But junior managers or new managers can oftentimes feel a little bit kind of like iffy around having those conversations. And so if you're looking at a metric that says, hey man, like I'm not making this up, like I'm not the heavy here, your win rate is low as compared to the team, like this is not a matter of opinion, we're just like looking at it right here. And that's why we need to put time on your calendar to have you do more time in like the batting cage, so to speak, like doing a pitch. Or hey man, like your opportunity ownership is way off as compared to peers. It looks like it's coming from a deficit in prospecting behavior. We're going to fix that because, and I'm not making this up right here. It's not because I'm the heavy, it's because we're looking at this data right here. And so we're going to talk a little bit, we're going to change gears a little bit here and talk about how to actually implement that in practice and do what we call data-driven sales coaching here. I think one of the things that can be really effective there, and this is where people kind of hesitate to implement coaching, is it feels like they think that it's micromanagement as opposed to like, no, we're here helping an individual get better at what they do because they don't necessarily know what they ought to be doing. So we'll kind of have some examples here around like what coaching doesn't look like and what it does look like with data. So probably the worst example of this would be like, hey, when's this deal coming in? Hey, Richard, when's the Lockheed deal coming in? Versus showing up with data and saying, hey, you know what? I've noticed that we only seem to be engaged with 3 contacts at Lockheed, and it's a pretty high ASP contract here. What do you think is potentially concerning you about that? Right? Or hey, you know what? This opportunity seems like it's forecast to close this quarter, but gee, there doesn't look like there's a meeting on the calendar in the future, and it seems like the last inbound email was like 3 weeks ago. How are you feeling about that? That would obviously be a very deal-centric coaching moment, but then that can like roll up from a metric standpoint, like, hey, you know what? I think I've noticed that your meeting volumes over the last 4 weeks has been lighter than it usually is, right? So like a decline in sales activity. Like, what do you think might be contributing to that? Where do you think that might be coming from, right? So it's like approaching it from a standpoint of like, hey, we seek to understand here, but also it's not, I'm not making this up, right? I'm not making this up. There's data that's leading me to this. Richard, what are some examples that you've seen in working with Atrium customers that kind of show, the most effective type of coaching versus ineffective coaching?
Yeah, we actually had a really great question here in the chat from Mike Garcia asking if KPIs can be gamified. And that's actually one of my favorite forms of sort of broader coaching, which is you have a team goal. Maybe it's something like making sure you have less untouched opportunities, or maybe less opportunities that don't have a next meeting scheduled, and kind of putting that up on a leaderboard that goes out to the team broadly, whether through Slack or through email. That's one of my favorite forms. In addition to, we have a feature in Atrium called Opportunity Health. And not only do we algorithmically tag all of the opportunities in a rep's pipeline with a health score, whether it's poor to good health, but we can also filter that down to more discrete data sets, like everything that you have closing this quarter that doesn't have a next meeting scheduled, or everything you have closing this quarter that you haven't touched in over a week. And this becomes something that becomes quite actionable. So you're kind of going from a sort of collective goal of this is something we want to focus on, and then putting that into something that's very tangible for a rep to actually act on. And most of the things that I do that I love the most for my customers is something that you can act on, whether as a rep or as a manager.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's what you want to make it really easy, where you say, hey, look, we have like a very clear, we do a masterclass on what is it called? Setting and managing with goals that don't suck.
Yeah.
Hey, we have just making it very clear. Hey, there's an expectation you should be having 15 customer facing meetings a week. If you don't have that many on your calendar, just find a customer to have a meeting with, right? Like go shopping your ops, or and same kind of like SDR, like, hey, you know what? You're supposed to be having this many, you're supposed to be engaging with this many new contacts on a weekly basis or a monthly basis. Oh, you're tracking behind that? Great. You should go in our data provider and find some more ideal customer contacts to engage there. Just make it very, very, very straightforward there. And so when it comes to coaching with data, it's actually like not a one-shot situation, right? Where you just say like, hey, do this, Richard, and then Richard does it and like we're done. It's actually more of a loop. And so one of the kind of metaphors that I really like to use with this is this concept of the OODA loop. So observe, orient, decide, and act. It comes from actually air-to-air combat doctrine that was developed by this gentleman named John Boyd, where there's essentially like a looping process here, where what you do is you start out and you observe the situation, right? You're looking at what your opponent is doing, but it also applies to data-driven sales management and management in general, where like you observe what the case is in the world, you then orient against it, right? So like, figure, like suss out what's going on, decide what action you want to take, and then act accordingly. And then that's not enough. What you then do is you loop back to this observation step and say, hey, did the thing that we acted and did it impact the situation as we observed it before? Right. And so in the case of John Boyd and company, it was air-to-air combat. But in this case, in the case of data-driven sales management, it would be things like, hey, we observe that there's a high level of untouched opportunities, or observing that this individual has a low number of customer-facing meetings, or we're observing that there's a high number of opportunities that haven't been touched. What we're going to do is we're going to make a judgment about that. I'm going to say, hey, I think that like the reason why you have a high number of untouched opportunities, I looked at how many ops are in your pipe right now, and it looks like you have about like twice as many opportunities as everybody else. That's where a lot of those untouched ops are coming from. That tells me that probably what I'm going to make a decision here and say, we probably should close out a bunch of those opportunities, because it doesn't seem like they're actually real. Let's go ahead and put time on your calendar for you to clean up your pipeline. And it's like, engage with these opportunities or close them out of your pipe. Like, let's go. And then we make that prescription, and then we come back in a week or so. We say, hey, we're going to measure this based on untouched opportunities, or we're going to measure this based on whatever the metric is. We come back and we observe it again. Oh, look, the untouched op count went down and our win rate went up. Isn't that fantastic? Or alternatively, maybe the untouched op count didn't go down, even though we made that prescription. Oh no, hey Richard, I thought we said you were going to close out a bunch of those opportunities. What happened there? Oh man, I got busy and I forgot to do it. Ah, okay, great. We're going to keep doing it until you do it. Versus, oh, actually I did close out a bunch of my opportunities and I still have a high number of untouched opportunities. Oh, that's weird. Why is that? Oh, because my calendar is overrun with customer meetings and I have no time on my calendar to do pipeline management. Got it. Okay. Well, let's actually put some recurring time blocks on your calendar for you to do that pipe maintenance and make sure there's actually time in your calendar, as like we like to say at Atrium, calendar is destiny, to do that pipeline management. Okay, yeah, that sounds great. And then loop back again and, oh, look at that. Gee whiz. Now the untouched op count finally went down. And that's why it's not a one-shot situation. Like you have to loop accordingly. And then once you've now solve that problem, in this case it happened to be like an untouched opportunity problem, there's always going to be another area for improvement. That's like kind of the way that this works. Like your job is never done as a manager, because it kind of goes back to this part right here. Like once we've identified an issue and fixed it, there's always going to be another issue that we have to identify and fix with a given rep. Or alternatively, if they've gotten to the point where they're really super successful, well, now what we want to do is standardize that behavior and spread that to the rest of the team. And so that's how like the OODA loop applies to sales management. So we're going to talk about a couple of examples here really quickly, some real life examples of this like data-driven OODA loop in practice with sales staff. So this is an example where a rep had an issue progressing deals down funnel here. And so what you can see is this is a specific Atrium KPI here. This is a little geeky, but I think everyone will be able to hang here. And what you can see is that on the y-axis here, this is the conversion rate from one stage to the next. So these are all the stages down here at the bottom. And you can see how this rep in orange, how his deals progressed from a percentage standpoint, how they converted as compared to the team average here. And really quickly, where you can see is that this rep seemed to have a problem here at the very top of the funnel. Looks like he had a hold rate problem. And then more specifically, he had pretty substantial problems at the bottom of the funnel, getting opportunities out of proposal, getting opportunities out of contract there. And so what you can also see here is what we did was we addressed that. We said, hey, you know what? We see these issues at the top of the funnel. We see them at the bottom of the funnel. We're going to go ahead and listen to some calls there. This is where data-driven management and call recording and call coaching can be really helpful, because listening to every single call is like probably not tenable. But then honing in on exactly where we need to listen is can be powerful. And so what you can see here is this rep kind of had this issue getting getting opportunities out of discovery here. Again, this is looking at the conversion rate specifically with respect to opportunities in the discovery stage. And so with a little bit of coaching, this went from kind of being down in the dumps here to jumping up very substantially here and kind of alleviating that problem. And what was great about that was that by doing this is another KPI, kind of an advanced KPI in Atrium, the stage attainment, the stage reach card, where what this was looking at is how many opportunities we're getting into this pilot stage for this rep. And so as soon as this rep changed his conversion rate out of the top of the funnel, you can see that the number of opportunities that he was getting into pilot really kind of took off here, which was great because like you don't want things leaking out of the top of the funnel before you're able to get them down funnel. And the same kind of was true from a down funnel standpoint. He was doing a better job. He got coached up on and was doing a much better job at win rate out of proposal. So like doing a better job of close winning out of proposal here, where he had a deficit as compared to his peers. And so as a result of this coaching that was focused on those two different parts of the funnel, what you can see is that his conversion rate kind of curve went from being weak up here and weak down here to actually being much higher as compared to his peers here. So jumping up above the rest of the team there. And what was even cooler was driving more and more pipeline growth. So what you can see here is the total amount of pipeline this rep was able to carry was pretty static there, because a lot of stuff was leaking out of the top of the funnel, even as more stuff was coming in. Then as a result of kind of plugging that leaky bucket, you can see a much higher output here in terms of the amount of pipe that was kind of growing there. Richard, did you have, I mean, I imagine you work with a lot of our customers with respect to doing kind of like stage conversion analysis and what have you. Have you seen kind of similar changes in rep behavior and kind of rep performance like this in your experience?
Yeah, definitely. I had a customer who essentially came to Atrium saying, "Hey, we have this stage where ops essentially go to die." It was like their
Fun.
stage 3, and they were like, "This is the big issue, and we need to be able to essentially blow this up and do exactly what you've done on these past few slides, which is show the conversion rate of this stage over time to see and track how we are improving, and then ultimately coach to behaviors to get folks out of," I believe it was an evaluation stage, and really getting a demo in, and then having a discrete follow-up. And so building not only against this conversion rate and tracking the pipeline that's coming into this stage, but also, are you scheduling follow-up meetings against opportunities that are in this stage as well? And we slowly start to see the conversion rate tick up, and we start to see better results from that.
I love it. Yep, that's what you want to do. So then the second place where it's not the second place, but another place that's like really, really critical for using data-driven sales management is in the ramp of newly hired reps, whether it's AEs or SDRs, but particularly with respect to account executives. And the reason why it's really important is because that's the point. Like, you should be paying attention to leading indicators in general, but in ramp, you only have leading indicators. And it's particularly problematic the longer your deal cycle is, the more important it is to pay attention to those leading indicators. And so organizations that only certify their reps and say, hey, we have success with respect to ramp at full productivity is that's really you're kind of like you're fighting with one hand tied behind your back there, because that's a big offset from when you initially are joining the organization, and then even doing the same sort of thing from a first deal based certification. And so what you really should be doing is paying attention to these leading indicators here during the pipe build process, right? So if you say like the first kind of part of when reps are joining an organization is spent on training, followed by pipe building, followed by the point at which they start closing deals to the point where they get to full productivity. This is really the place where, if you're paying attention to leading indicators, one, you can, if there's any hiccups, you can address them, or two, if somebody's like not going to work out, you can choose to take the appropriate action there, and rather than kind of like throwing good money after bad. And so what we're going to do is do a little example here. This is actually data from one of our customers that's been anonymized. And so what you can see is that you had this rep, Chicken Little here, who looked like, from a pipe build standpoint, from an opportunity ownership standpoint, looked like he was like actually doing okay. This is actually something in Atrium is you can position, you can put all reps together at time equals 0 here, like you can have all their start dates together, and it'll show you how they compare to each other on a per time basis as compared to other reps at the same point in ramp. And so if you look at Chicken Little right here, you can kind of see like, yeah, he actually looks like pretty okay there from an op ownership standpoint. Now, the problem is that if you do a better job and look at more leading indicators and not just like the op ownership there, you can actually see that in spite of the fact of having all these opportunities, the number of ops he's actually touching is like pretty poor, right? He has a lot of ops, but he's like not engaging with them very much, especially as compared to his peers. And then moreover, if you look at the unique number of of accounts that he's interacting with, it's also quite low, right? It's like not, he's pretty much only interacting with the opportunities in question there, whereas his peers are engaging with like many other accounts as well, and doing a good job around prospecting, what have you. So like, this would be very concerning to see that somebody's out of step with their peers here. And then moreover, if you look at like just pure activity information, you can see that he's really low with respect to email volume there. And so this would be a great example of, oh man, it really seems like there's something amiss here. We should get on top of it. And so moreover, what you can see is that in spite of the fact that his opportunity ownership isn't terrible here, the number of opportunities that are getting out of discovery, so like this is that stage reach card we were talking about previously, you can see that the number of ops that get to disco, it's like okay, it's not amazing, and then it degrades pretty substantially here. And so it shouldn't be super surprising that if the top of funnel is not great, right, the number of ops getting in discovery isn't great, then the mid funnel, right, in this case, this organization has a mid funnel stage called solution presentation, also is degrading as well. Well, both of these leading indicators would tell us that, like, if ops aren't progressing along, they're probably not going to close win. And so lo and behold, you can see this, right? Is that the rep in question was like pretty light with respect to bookings as compared to his peers. And then really in that month 4 and month 5, just, like really becomes stark there when he should be getting up to full productivity here, like these other reps. He's still kind of like down on the dumps here. And so that's not super surprising. Again, that shouldn't surprise anyone, because look at these leading indicators here. How can you close deals if you're not getting things out of disco here? And so what ended up happening as a result, and in the first quarter here, this rep had 40% fewer wins than his peers and similar number of bookings as compared to his peers. And so the good news is the organization was able to catch that in month 3 and month 4, but you can only imagine what this would look like, and if this hadn't been paying attention to this and hadn't been bird dogging those leading indicators in month 5, 6, and 7, you could have had a situation where a rep was not pulling his weight, continuing to take opportunities from other reps and not really doing anything about it. The kind of the funny haha about this was, if you were to look at this, is like, man, that really seems like somebody was pretty out of step as compared to his peers. What was going on there? Well, this was a situation where a remote rep, for whatever reason, was running a side hustle out of during business hours, and the side hustle kind of got a little bit more. I guess it became like less of a side hustle and more of like a main hustle, and negatively impacted the ability of the rep to spend appropriate time on customer facing behaviors. Rich, do you have any other kind of like horror stories like this around data-driven sales management catching something that was like pretty amiss?
I don't have anything as crazy as this one.
It's pretty crazy.
This one's pretty egregious, but we've had a lot of conversations around underperforming reps who didn't really know what to do to improve that performance, and this has definitely been a great tool to just kind of highlight where exactly to put your efforts. And I've had a lot more conversations around that exact subject recently, as budgets get tighter, as headcount gets tighter, and we're trying to really maximize the efforts of our reps.
Yep, for sure. Yeah, and like, this isn't to say that like data-driven sales management is here to like the primary use case is catching reps who decide that they want to run an Airbnb network out of their free time or whatever. It's about like, it's about addressing issues and then driving better performance, because ultimately salespeople, the nice thing about data-driven sales management and sales management in general is there's wild alignment, like wild value alignment between reps and management. We want everyone to just close more business so they can make more money. And the mechanism by which we do that is through better coaching, right? We're not here, like, we're not doing this for fun, right? We're doing this to win championships, because if we score more points, we're going to win championships. Everyone's going to do better. We're all going to get rings, and everyone's just going to be a lot happier there. So that's kind of all the content that we had to cover here today. Again, if folks would like to get a copy of 5 Secrets of the Sales Coach, Crushing Quota, and Coffee is for Coaches, we're going to go ahead and drop a link to that in the chat here. You can scan the QR code if you'd like to as well. But otherwise, I think we're oh, hey, Elliot's here. He's here with the hook. Elliot, we got anything else you need to cover?
No, that's it. Just about to wrap things up.
Nice.
Yeah, just like Pete said, link to those goodies are in the chat. I do want to say thank you to you guys over there at Atrium, doing amazing things. Link to their website is also in the chat, so definitely check them out. Thank you to Pete and Richard for providing the content. Recordings and key takeaways will be available on our page shortly. Also, don't forget to check out our upcoming events, and thank you so much. We'll see you guys next time.